Super pleased to introduce Dr. Maria Blevins, who's an associate professor in the Department of Communication at Utah Valley University. So thank you so much for joining us, Maria, and I'm going to go ahead and pass it over to you.
Thank you so much, Angie. I really appreciate the introduction. And my introduction to myself is kind of woven into my presentation. So I'm Maria. As Angie said, I'm a professor in the communication department at the Utah Valley University. And I really study how we create environmental messages and also how organizations behave as actors in environmental issues. But before I was an academic, I was a whitewater rafting guide. And so I guided in West Virginia and in Wyoming. I spent about 12 years on the river, sometimes for a majority of the year, sometimes as I was going through grad school. And so that's a really important part of my identity that's going to really speak to how I got interested in this research and how I had access to this research group. So I became interested in this research project when in 2015, sort of a group of people at Grand Canyon National Park came together and reported years of sexual harassment by the river rangers. And as I read the reports, I was really struck by them. And I was struck by them because as I read them, as an academic and as a person in this world, I thought, wow, that is like some really shocking behavior. But as someone that had been part of the river community for years, I just thought, I had seen a lot of similar activities happen and they never even struck me as strange or out of the ordinary. And I became interested in how you can be socialized into a group of folks and how the norms of that group can be passed on. And you really, at least I didn't really question them, and that things that happened in the river community that would be really, I would find not acceptable in other parts of my life, were just sort of part of being part of the gang. And so that intrigued me to start this study. I started chatting with other friends from the river community, and we all kind of had the same question of like, what makes this environment so unique and different? And then we were also interested in the strategies that people use to fit in these environments. So that began my journey on an ethnographic study where I did participant observation, where I went and hung out at raft companies. I also went to river festivals and observed behavior there. I did 58 interviews with people that work on all sorts of rivers. They work as multi-day guides, which is where you put on a river and you have with you all of your food and equipment for days and days, to people that did day trips. So in day trips, it's more like a traditional job where you go and you work on the river and then you come home. But at a lot of those places, you work and live in guide camps on site of the property. I talked to people of multiple genders, male, female, and non-binary. And I will just let you know that for this research project, I have taken away all sort of reference to river names, company names, and I've changed the names of my participants. So I'll be using a lot of direct quotes, but all of the identifiers of who these folks are has been erased. So today I'm going to talk to you a little bit about the working environment of the river community. And you might think, well, why is this part of this conference? Some of you might manage river groups. I also, as I've presented my research, this might sound familiar for folks that work in any backcountry capacity or in any outdoor industry. There's a lot of commonalities in the river world with the ski world and the rock climbing world. And I have presented this to a lot of groups and it's resonated in a lot of places. So I'm going to talk about the unique working environment. I'm going to explore the pop culture messages about the industry. I'm going to demonstrate strategies that women use to succeed in this industry. I'm going to outline some of the issues with reporting that I found in my research. And then I'm going to give some suggestions to consider for change and hopefully some tools that you'll be able to leave and use, today in the workplace. So I start with this quote: sexual harassment will not be reported, but it will be graded. And one of my participants said that this sign used to hang in the guide check-in where they would report to work every day. And I think it just sort of sets the tone of what my research found, which was sexual harassment was kind of considered to be a joke, and that making sort of lewd or sexual jokes was sort of accepted in the environment. I do want to start by saying that not everything about this job is bad. And I also want to say that not only does sexual harassment impact women, and it impacts non-binary individuals and men. And I would argue that as we make this a safer place for everyone, it becomes a safer place for everyone. And so I just want you to keep that in mind as we continue. So I want to start with what there is to love about the job. As Martha said, when the trip was over and I was back home, I realized that I was in love with Whitewater, actually in love with it. I would wake up at night and I would dream about it. I felt that euphoric feeling that you feel when you're in love, thinking about a river and beautiful canyon sites. And while I realized that's what I wanted to do, at the time I didn't necessarily think that's what I'm going to do for a long time, but I've got to do this. The best description of this is like being in love. It's actually like being in love with another human, but I had that reaction to Whitewater and nature and that lifestyle. So this is Martha describing how she got into the whitewater industry. She went on a commercial trip and she literally just fell in love. And Martha is probably one of the most long-term female raft guides that I know of. She's been guiding for close to 40 years. And so that passion and that love has stayed with her. Bria said, well, the job itself is pretty amazing to me, just because I get to do something that I absolutely love to do, run whitewater, and I get to teach someone else how to do it. You get to see people fall in love with something that you love. And I think that's just magic. And I think just getting to be on the river teaches you so much, and then you're bringing a handful of strangers out doing it. So I just want to set that stage that people really love this job and love being on the river and sharing it with other folks. It's also a really unique work environment. So I feel like Amelia captured this really well in this quote when I asked, what's different about this job than a traditional job? And she said, everything. I mean, it would be like if you were to go to the office from 9 to 5, and then everyone in your office came home with you, and you all made dinner together, and then you had to sleep over on your living room floor 3 feet from each other. And then you did that for 6 days in a row, or 14 days in a row, without really seeing anyone else, or interacting or engaging with anyone else. So really, especially with multi-day guiding, it's really, you're sort of on 24/7. And in that way, I don't think you're in a normal workplace. So you get this idea that you are with people in this intense way, privacy is limited, and that blurry line between work and home is particularly blurry in this industry. Ken said, you don't always have to be clean. You don't always have to look professional. You don't always have to act professional. You can abuse drugs, tobacco, and alcohol, and that's not something that's frowned upon in the industry. That's a big one. And you can be a loudmouth jackass and no one seems to care, or it's almost encouraged. So from this quote, I choose it because it shows that there's almost a counterculture to the rafting industry. There's maybe a little more drugs and alcohol involved in that place, and sort of that being boisterous and loud and funny is an important part of the job. I asked people if they felt that harassment happened, and Nicole said, I felt the sexist attitudes and language that was used as something that in any other work environment I've been in is totally unacceptable. And there it was just standard, the way that people talk to each other. That I think is the main difference. But also most of my other jobs haven't been guide jobs. On the river, that was the only place I've really experienced people swearing as much as they did, and just the blatant out there sexism and other biases that are just okay to be talked about. So Nicole really felt like it was much more prevalent than in any other workplace that she's been in. And when I asked these folks, does harassment happen? Tim said, effing millions. And no, I can't remember them all. Millions, probably 65 today minimum. And Will said, just yeah, every day. And Elizabeth said, every day, like 10,000 times a day. So we get an idea that harassment is happening in this environment. And I share with you, these are some of the characteristics that the U.S. Equal Employment Opportunity Commission have identified as places where harassment is more likely to occur. And some of these might sound familiar for those of you that have worked in the outdoor industry, in workplaces that feature homogenous employees, right? So if people are similar ages, similar races, similar socioeconomic classes. So the more pressure there is to be similar, or the more like people are, the more harassment is possible. Workplaces with many young employees. So this is often the case at summer camps and raft companies and outdoor adventure places. And the young employees is for a lot of reasons. Young employees haven't learned appropriate behavior yet. They might not really understand the consequences of their behavior. When a young employee is targeted, they might not have the skills to defend themselves or to report harassment. And some experienced workers may take advantage of more vulnerable younger employees. Another indicator is workplaces with power differences between employees. So for example, senior guides and trip leaders versus trainees. A lot of folks that work on the rivers have a really vulnerable time when they haven't checked out on the river yet, or they're still baggage boating. So they are not officially members of the organization, and yet they are doing all of the things that a member of the organization would do. Jobs that are focused on customer service and satisfaction. There's a ton of research about how in the restaurant industry, sexual harassment is prevalent, and it's similar with guiding. You want people to leave having a good time. Often you're working for tips. Workplaces that are isolated from other people, and this came up over and over again. Who do you report sexual harassment to when perhaps it's your trip leader that is the person doing these behaviors, and you're out on a 1 week wilderness trip, right? That can be a really tricky situation because you're isolated from other folks, maybe the support systems that you might have in your personal life. Workplaces that abide drinking or abusing alcohol, and workplaces that are decentralized. So again, you go out on your trips and the management is in somewhere else, and it's tough to get a hold of them. So as you can see here, if we just look at the research that the EEOC has done, that guiding has a lot of these characteristics that make a place vulnerable. So we've established that there is sexual harassment that happens in the guiding industry. And now I want to talk about something that really surprised me as one of my findings, which was that customers that came in were actually sometimes more problematic than anyone else. And that was because they came in expecting that their guide was going to be sort of this tall, beardy outdoorsman. And some people felt really upset by a female guide. So I'm going to sort of go into that a little bit. Alma said, at the top of a big rapid, I feel it a lot, where people are choosing boats and I feel like a really competent rower. And yet I still feel people from the outside are so ready to look at the tall bearded man before they look at me. And there's this instance of being on the river and with our baggage boater, had never been down this river before, but he was 6 feet tall and wearing a flannel and has this big full beard. And these customers are like, we want to be in this guy's boat. And it's like, okay, yeah, he has a beard, but I've been reading water for 15 years and I have 4,000 commercial river miles. And I've been down this river 3 or 4 times this season. Like, yeah, I'm 5'3", but I'm a little more qualified than this taller man. And I think in those situations, I don't know what to say, because it's not a huge thing to be choosing a boat and to look this way, but you should look this way before you look that way. So Alma talks about how people just sort of assume men are going to be better guides, or who they think is going to be a better guide. Marcus said this: they're going to listen to me because I'm a big burly man, but a woman who is just as capable as a big burly man needs to convince a big burly man, guys, that she's capable. So she does have a harder job. It's not sexuality. It's just that she has to say, hey, I'm an effing competent river guide, and I can get you down the river and give you a great ride. So she has a harder road. What's that word again? Harder. So not only do women have to be out there performing the job, they also have to be convincing people that they're able to do the job. And I'm going to share this story with Nicole, which is one that really gets my heart every time I share it. I had a big Girl Scout group. I was down at the river. It was high water, so we were putting on our company's property, which was up higher than our normal put in. So I was down there blowing up the boats, and the rest of the people came down with the group. with their bus, and they showed up and divvied everyone out. And I had a handful of Girl Scouts and 2 leaders or something like that. And I'm giving them my spiel and I'm wanting them to get ready. And we're like looking everywhere, whispering to each other. And I was like, what's the deal? What's going on here? We need to be in the same team here if we're going to be on the river together. I'm going to do my best to keep you all safe, but you need to talk to me if there's something wrong. And the leaders just said, we don't want a female guide. Trying to be a good role model for young women, you're going to bring these young women down and you're not even going to pull me aside to say it. They said it in front of the Girl Scouts. So that story always sticks with me. The Girl Scouts is sort of this organization built to empower girls and women in the outdoors. And these leaders didn't even want to go down with a female raft guide. So I don't think people are intrinsically bad. And so I like to think about where did they get this idea? And I really appreciated Lisa's presentation yesterday, where she examined some of our ideas of wilderness. And my research did a similar thing. I was curious about how do customers get this idea of who their guide is going to be? So the first thing I did is I looked at 30 websites for rafting companies around the US. And what I found is the pictures that they display, the men guides are having the really big hits. So there was only 3 women that I could identify. There were some folks that you couldn't tell because of how the picture was taken, but of the people that were getting like the big, they call them the hero shots on a website, only 3 of them are women. Usually women were on the beach serving lunch or hanging out on a paddleboard in flat water or hula hooping, like showing that they're having a fun time. Or women were more often portrayed in the family section of the brochure or the website, where there's less big whitewater. So that was the first thing, is that by looking at the brochures from the companies, you might assume it's going to be a male raft guide. The other thing I did, which was both really fun and sometimes really excruciating, was watch every movie I could that sort of featured the river or river culture. And, in the majority, what I found was it was a group of men having an adventure in the wilderness, proving their friendship and their masculinity together. And when women were a part of the plot line, they were often there to support. And I'm going to show you this clip of my favorite example of this river. This comes from Indiana Jones, and I just feel like it really typifies the man sort of saving the day and the woman being very reluctant about the rafting adventure.
I think we got a big problem.
Dr. Jones!
Shorty!
Dr. Jones! No more parachutes!
Shorty! Come on, give me a hand. Move the box. Come on. Bring me in. Help me. Shorty! Get our stuff!
A boat! We're not sinking! We're crashing!
Grab on, Shorty! Grab on!
Baby, I can't
That wasn't so bad, was it?
I hate the water! And I hate being wet! And I hate you!
Good!
That sort of, I think, typifies that particular scene, right? Where what a whitewater adventure that is. with tobogganing, parachuting, and looks like some pretty rowdy whitewater there. And so, you know, at the end of that scene, she says, I hate the water, I hate rafting, and I hate you, right? And so she's there sort of supporting Indiana in that adventure. And that was sort of what I found. And that fits into our ideas and our mythologies about who's going to be in the wilderness. And so I have here, you know, three people that we often associate with, you know, transcendentalism or the wilderness advocacy movement. And I think we often imagine it's going to be like a tall, beardy white man that is guiding our adventure. And again, Lisa did a really beautiful job of challenging our assumptions on this yesterday. And so if you weren't at that workshop, if you have a chance to go back and watch that, to really think about who do we imagine is going to be out there? Who do we imagine is going to be leading our outdoor adventures? There is, of course, one exception to this, and that is the movie The River Wild. And when I went back and watched that, I was still struck with the fact that Meryl Streep's character is this like amazingly confident outdoor woman. She handles herself beautifully on the river and off the river. And I sort of did some thinking after rewatching this movie for this project. And the movie came out the year that I started college. And I remember very vividly going to watch it as a college freshman and thinking, gosh, I'd love to be a woman that's that like confident and strong. She's portrayed in this movie that in a way that I think not a lot of women in movies are. And I sometimes wonder if I was drawn to becoming a river guide years later, just because of how she was portrayed as a woman. And so this movie is an absolute outlier in my research, but I think should be mentioned. I also think it's interesting that when you go on online forums or when you often talk to old timer raft guides, they'll say, oh yeah, that movie, my buddy is like a slight dude with blonde hair and he did the rowing for her. And when you research it, it's actually like two amazing whitewater women that did the rowing for the movie. But it's interesting how even this movie becomes part of river mythology and storytelling about how men were part of the filming. And I'm sure there was a lot of great men part of the filming, but anyway. So that is sort of how I think customers get an idea of who their guide is going to be. It's who we think is going to be in the wilderness, and who we're telling people are going to be in the wilderness through our advertising and through the media around it. So the strategies are the next thing I want to talk about. And this is what I think is some of the most interesting things that came out of my research. It's part of what I'm most compelled by. And I really asked all of my participants, male, female, non-binary, about what strategies did you use at those moments that you didn't feel comfortable in this working environment. And so I'm going to share some of those strategies with you. And they might feel familiar because, again, as I've talked about this, people in every profession feel like they have used these strategies to fit in. So the first one is being tough. And Ari said, I know a lot of really good female river guides, but they're really tough people. And I think that's what it takes for women to survive in this industry, is that they be tougher than average. John said, I think raft guides and outdoor folks in general, it doesn't usually bring the softest people. So they're usually the women that I work with are pretty tough women. They're pretty great. So thin skin doesn't usually last long around the guiding world. So this idea of you need to be tough, which of course we need to be tough and be able to be out in the elements and to carry heavy boats. But, should you have to be emotionally tough to take humor and comments or actions or assaults that don't feel good? The next strategy that came out was humor. Adam said, I would say over the years of this, I've seen many different people have dealt with it. And I think probably the most common, and unfortunately maybe the most effective, is just women that just laugh it off a little. They say, it's not a big deal, haha. Because I think there's a need to be perceived as strong. If they get upset or lash out or cry or file a complaint, well, then that's just someone who can't roll with it. That's someone who's weak or whatever. And I put this quote here because it connects to the being tough and being strong with the humor, right? So you make it into a joke because you're probably not going to be that accepted if you report it or react in a different way. Another quote to talk about humor, Crystal said, I think I definitely just started dishing it back at the guys. If they sort of harass me, not only I wouldn't necessarily sexually harass them back, but I would just tell dirty jokes and I would just laugh at lewd remarks. So Crystal just adopted a strategy of kind of dishing it back to them. And that points to the next strategy that I found, that not only using humor, not only laughing it off, but being crass. So, you know, perhaps if you could be more offensive than the people that are offending you, they won't notice. So Brent said, some of the girls have worse mouths than any male I've ever heard in my life. Of course, they're accepted quicker because all the guys think they're more fun. You're not walking on eggshells on what you can say around them. And Albert said, a lot of the ladies that I've encountered at raft camp, that's what they do. They try to be bigger, badder, and more vulgar. Do it to a greater extent than the people that are offending you or pissing you off. And Amalia said, I just thought of it as being one of the guys and making dirty jokes. I think when you're young, it's like, oh, I know how to fit in. I can swig a PBR and say cuss words. And, you know, this strategy really spoke to me. Being crass was definitely a strategy that I use, and I can still see myself when I'm nervous, like letting a joke slip out that might not be the greatest. And it's a way that I use to fit in. The next that I'm going to talk about is being a guy's gal. So this is sort of when you can joke around with the men, but also just show that you're tough and cool. Olivia said this: what's viewed as a good thing in the rafting world is strength and toughness and being tough and macho. And so you see these women who are struggling to be as macho and tough and hard as they can be. And they're getting drunk with the guys, and they're going beer for beer, and they're telling dirty jokes, and they're acting rude and vulgar, and they're lifting heavy shit, and they're flipping the rafts, and they're being as macho as the men can be. And again, this isn't bad if you're having fun doing this. It's totally fine. But as we look into these strategies, perhaps if this is how everyone is acting, again, those homogenous workplaces, if there's not another way to act, right, that is where the problem comes in. Another quote about being a guy's gal, Raven said, I can be just as tough of them or tougher. I can hurt them before they hurt me. And I can go ahead and tell them that they can't hurt me. You can be one of the boys. You can be grosser than them. So for me, that worked. Okay, I'll be a boy, and I'll be the boyest boy of them all. Laughing it off is kind of like humor, but it's when you really just make light of it. Crystal said, there's definitely times when I remember other guys saying things to me that made me feel uncomfortable about my performance or about my physical appearance or about something, but I would mostly just try to laugh it off and then distance myself from that person. So you laugh it off at that moment, and then you make sure you're not near them again. Justin said, I actually think the girls that don't get offended at sexual connotation jokes fit in better with guys, and the guys accept them more quickly and easily than the ones that get offended if you say something about whatever. You make some little crack and somebody gets all offended and you're like, okay, well, she's not cool. She's not fun. And of course, in the raft guard world, you want to be fun and cool, right? So you're socialized to laugh it off, make it a joke. The next strategy, and this might feel familiar to a lot of folks, is being good at the job. Emily said, so it forces you to have to basically be perfect, you know, like the guys that could do stuff like make a mistake or something, and it was just laughed about. And if a girl makes a mistake, then it's that they aren't confident. So as a woman in a job like that, I think you have to be perfect. You have to hold yourself to a higher standard than the guys, for sure. Another quote that reflects being good at the job, Carmen said, oh, I think it makes it way harder because people just assume you're not competent and that you're not strong and that you can't row heavy boats in Whitewater, or that you can't run a motor or lift stuff, and that you just have to work so much harder. I always work with a lot of dudes who I love, but they're kind of dipsticks and maybe not the most competent with their thoughts. They're fine, they're average guys, but every single woman I work with out there is like spectacular. So in this being good at the job, a lot of women felt like they really had to be exceptional to be accepted in the workplace. The next strategy that came up was getting a boyfriend. Elise said, I was dating someone very seriously, a man seriously, and so everyone kind of respected that and didn't really bother me too much. There was a lot of talk about, you know, when people call dibs, or that if you were dating someone, you were kind of protected by them. Mary said, yeah, I eventually ended up just sticking to a relationship with one of them and staying in that relationship way past any time that I should have stayed with him, more for safety than for love, just so that I wouldn't have to worry. Like I had since he was my boyfriend, I had his protection. So Mary talks about how through having a boyfriend, she felt safer in that community. The next thing I want to talk about is how women warn each other. So in other industries, this is talked about as whisper networks. Pearl said, but yeah, there are times where it can act as a protector or a protectant. And I think it's a kind of dynamic in any workplace, how women will do that whisper thing, like, hey, look out for this guy, he's bad news. He'll play that game and he'll, you'll do great as long as you do such and such. So that kind of exists, not in exactly the same way as it might in a traditional workplace. And this quote really got me that Amelia said, you knew who wasn't above board. You knew who not to hang around with. You knew who not to be alone with. That existed. There were people that were like, don't go on an overnight by yourself with them. That's not cool, which means, of course, somebody else did and learned that lesson. So these whisper networks occur where people warn each other about who might be unsavory. And it's a way that we help protect each other. And then the last strategy that I identified is that they leave. They no longer work in the industry. Gretchen said they all leave. They all leave. None of those badass women that I'm referring to, with the exception of one, she's making a real commitment out of it, trying to be on the USA Raft team. But most of the women left. It's a part of their life that they love, and they're glad they did it, but they were just surrounded by man children. Kim said, my sister left because she was assaulted, which is part of the reason that I didn't come back and live full time. So that breaks my heart that, these women did not feel safe enough living on site that they had to totally leave the industry. So those are some of the strategies that I identified. There are a few more that I'm exploring and writing about in the book that I'm writing, but these are the things that people do to fit in this environment, to be accepted in this environment. And it's by sort of adopting those strategies that people fit in. But also, the more you tell crass jokes, right, the more you show that you can hang and be funny, the less credibility then you have to go and report something, right? So it's kind of this cycle that feeds itself, that the more you become part of that crew, then can you still go report it, and you become more indoctrinated into that environment. So the next thing, and the last sort of key finding from my research that I want to talk about, is reporting. Now, it seems like there's a wide variety of folks involved in this conference. And so this might be unique for river companies. I know government agencies and a lot of organizations have more structured reporting strategies. But what I found is a lot of folks thought, oh, this isn't happening in my organization. We don't even need to have a reporting system, or if they have one, it wasn't communicated to folks. So I asked people, who would you report an issue to if you felt like you were being harassed? And Albert said, that's a great question, because I don't think anyone knows. I don't think anyone would be able to come up with someone that they felt like they could trust enough. Alma said, that's such a great question, because you were saying that, I realized I don't know how to report. I asked Ari at the company, who would you, talk to if there was a case of harassment? And he said, that's easy. Keep my damn mouth shut, because the people that are the most sexist are the ones at the highest up. Like I said, it's easy. I will just talk about it around the campfire, kick rocks, and leave it at that. So not only did Ari not really know who to report to, he felt that the people in charge would probably not listen to him, or maybe some of the people that he would be reporting about. I'm sorry, I forgot to put Carmen's name here, but her quote is, I didn't necessarily feel comfortable talking to the rest of the crew. And let me explain a little bit. Carmen was on a multi-day trip where she was a baggage boater. And so it was her first time with this company. She was being harassed by one of the other guides, and she really didn't know what to do. It was a 2-week-long trip. And they said, I didn't feel very comfortable talking to the rest of their crew, because it was the classic, like, okay, this is my first baggage slot down here. And all those things. And I still had multiple times where I wanted to say, hey, don't say those things to me. Don't do it, but it didn't work. And it just kept getting more and more insidious. And, what's pointed out is when you're a baggage boater, it's like a 2-week-long job interview where you are trying to make a good impression. And so not only do you not know who to report to, but also you don't have connections with the folks in the company, and you're brand new. So it's a really sticky situation. And so I asked, so what? Hazel had this quote that really struck me. you're not going to change the culture. You're going to complain and be the only one raising a ruckus about it. You're not going to have many friends, so you'd rather just fit in and have friends and laugh along. So I think that this is sort of what the culture depends on, that you're going to, the phrase is get along to go along, or go along to get along. It's just sort of the cost of being part of the organization. And as Jane says, a lot of the times in the beginning, especially when they're younger men, they say, oh, are you sure you can do this? It's a lot of questioning your ability and questioning whether or not you're safe. They're safe with you. And again, you have to project, and it's not something I think men have to do. You have to project your abilities. You have to make people feel comfortable. Somehow you've got to change your demeanor enough to come off like you own it, so that nobody questions whether or not they're safe with you, whether or not you can do the job that you're supposed to be doing. So I think we find this a lot of times outside and in the wilderness, where women have to work a little harder to just convince folks that they should be out there. So what I would ask of us today is to ask questions like, can we change the culture so that everyone feels safe working here? Can we interrogate the narratives about who we expect leading outside adventures? And can we think about if we're asking women to be tough and strong and sassy enough to put up with bad behavior? So I think that my research indicates that people feel like they have to use these strategies to fit in, and maybe not feel upset when harassment or things happen that make them feel unsafe. And I think that we're asking a lot of individuals, and I think we lose a lot of people. I've been in a lot of sessions at this conference that talk about how do we welcome new people to the outdoors. And I think if we just expect that everyone's going to be comfortable with joking in a particular way, or putting up with jokes or actions that might not feel safe, we're probably not going to be as inviting as we hope to be. So now what? I'm not going to just outline the problems. I'm going to give a few solutions that I think also came out from my research, and also through work I'm doing with some of the folks that are in this meeting, Becca and Angie, through a group called A-, where we are actively working to make the river community a safer place for everybody. So the first thing that I would recommend, if your organization does have a reporting system, that's great, but maybe look at it and ask a few questions. If your organization does not have a reporting system, I would say the best thing to do is create one quickly. So figure out what your reporting system is. Is it hard to navigate? What are the systems? Who can people report to? And maybe wondering, a lot of folks reported that, you'll remember the quote from Ari, that the people that you report to might be the biggest perpetrators, or that the people that you report to are all men. Maybe is there a variety of people that you can approach in different levels of the organization, that so that people can have options for who they feel safe talking to. What about when you're out in the wilderness? Do you have a protocol? And are guides checking in with each other, not only on the physical safety of each other on a trip, but their emotional safety? Are there customers that are making them feel uneasy, or how are they doing? And then asking, do women have leadership positions in your organization? Because often, and I'm going to expand this from just women, how diverse is your leadership? Because with diverse people, we have diverse perspectives and diverse ideas about what is important. The next thing is having honest conversations about what harassment can look like. There's been a lot of changes in expectation, and I'm really amazed by the students that are coming up that I have in school right now as students, Gen Z. They are more willing to talk about things, and they are less willing to put up with behavior that I felt like I had to put up with. And so when you have a multi-generational workforce, I think it's important to sit down and talk about, how does harassment look? I think bringing into talking about consent. So a lot of people express, and I myself feel like, you don't want to lose the fun of a working environment. I think part of what's really fun about these outdoor jobs is the connections and the fun you get to have. But what I heard over and over was, there was a joke that felt fine a lot of days in a row. And then one day it just didn't feel fine anymore, but I didn't feel like I could say stop. And so creating a workplace and an environment where you can say, that just doesn't feel funny today. And the joker doesn't have to feel upset. And people can feel really confident about saying no and knowing that that will be respected and listened to. And it doesn't mean that you're a stick in the mud or a fuddy-duddy. And then wondering, do you have individuals in your organization that you warn people about? And this can be a tough question, right? But we might know senior guides or beloved members of our organizations that we might describe as crusty or creepy, or, maybe don't go grab a beer with them by yourself. And I don't think that these people need to be fired, but can we have gentle conversations with them where we redirect their behavior? But if we do have people that we're warning folks about, why aren't we taking action and managing them in a different way? Other things that I think are important is train people how to deal with sexist comments that might come from customers or whoever you interact with. So I like to have one-liners in my pocket. So often I'm like, oh, I wish I would have said that, days or weeks later. So if you just have a few responses for those comments that might come up, letting customers know they can be banned from the company or asked to leave the trip. I've heard from a company owner that the National Park Service has now offered to helicopter out customers that are displaying harassment behaviors. And so just letting them know that that behavior is unacceptable. Training the TLs how to handle a customer that might be harassing a guide. And then having the customer sign a code of conduct. This is another thing that some companies are doing so that people come on their vacation knowing what's going to be accepted of them, that, they don't get just to talk to the guides in any way that they want to. I also really like to introduce people to the 5 Ds of bystander intervention. So the research reportedly says that doing a sexual harassment training doesn't really change the culture of a workplace. But what can change is if you train the other coworkers to partake of these 5 Ds so they are able to take action when they see something happening. So this is not necessarily when you are being harassed, but if you maybe see someone being harassed, you can use one of these 5 Ds. So the first is to be direct, where you directly intervene. I'm sorry, did I hear you just say that? I don't think that you want to say that to another human being. You can distract, right? So you make a joke or ask a question to interrupt that behavior. You can delegate, which is where you ask for assistance. So maybe you would go get a manager, go get the trip leader, perhaps call the police in the state of a really bad situation. Delay, which means perhaps there's nothing you can do in that exact moment, but you can approach that person after the incident and say, hey, are you all right? I had a situation recently where I went into an outdoor shop and older fella came in and said to the bike mechanic, who happened to be a woman, like, I was really surprised to see there was a female bike mechanic, and you're not a B word like all the other women out there. And I was just kind of shocked, and that person was shocked, and the man left. And I went up to the bike mechanic and I just said, are you okay? That was weird. And she said, thanks so much for checking in. I wanted to process that with someone, but didn't know like if it was in my head. So that I still wonder if I should have been more direct in that exact moment, but that's a way that I used delay pretty recently. And then document. So if it's safe for you to do, to take photos, take notes, take documentation so that if that person needs support, if they're going to file a complaint later on, that you can help them in that action. And then last, I ask us to think about what bodies are we expecting outside? And, in your organization, do you have groups that are joked about? So maybe that's women, maybe that's people of color, and really think about what the consequences are of that is. Again, I'm not here to say that humor, I love humor. I love to joke. I hope I'm a fun person, but sometimes we can use joking to express who we think belongs or doesn't belong in a group. And so really pay attention to, hey, who are we joking about? And should we be making jokes about fat people, right? That's really exclusionary, and that's probably going to come across to them as they come on an outdoor adventure with us. And then wonder about what a fun working environment is. Fun for everyone, right? Just because you might really enjoy these jokes, really think about what it might be like, right? Using empathy to figure out, does this feel good to everyone that's in that group? And I really liked to end my presentation with this quote from Amelia, who works for an organization that's really done some work to promote women, and she felt like there's a lot of equity at her workplace. And I think it paints a really nice picture of how this can create better working places for all of us. So Amelia said, yeah, I think a big meta example is like my company. By the time I got there, there were enough senior guides who were women in leadership, and the culture as a whole had shifted. And it was really cool to see. And, you know, guides are still hooking up and breaking up and all that stuff. But there was sort of this expectation of care where, and I think a big part of it was that the men also felt really comfortable being vulnerable and being caretakers and reading poetry. Like, it was an interesting thing because for whatever reason, that culture evolved into a place where the women could be really strong and powerful and row boats. But at the same time, it was almost like the space was created because men had their space to do things that were typically ascribed to the female gender. So I just think it feels nice if we can all explore both the masculine and feminine parts of ourselves and be outside and show other people how to have fun outside as well. And this is my email address if you have any questions or if I can support you in any way. And I am going to stop sharing and then open this up for questions or any discussion that anyone might want to have. And thank you so much for listening to my presentation.
Thank you so much, Maria. Thank you for sharing about your research.
I have a question. I was wondering if you went and interviewed any of the female dory guides out there, because I know they have a different culture than the raft guides.
Yeah, I did interview a few folks that have guided for companies that do the dory trips. I did not interview anyone that was a fly fishing guide, which I think is an even more unique culture. But yeah, some of my participants were dory guides. Did that answer your question?
Yes, it did.
So I have a question, Maria. Did you notice any regional differences or geographic differences? You know, in your sampling, it sounds like this is national, and so there's people from a lot of different places. But I'm just curious if there was any regionality to it that was notable.
Yeah, I really appreciate that question. You know, where I would say that there is a bigger difference than region is by company, right? So that management really matters. And so an interesting thing about the river community is, you know, some people are able to just like move to the Grand Canyon and guide, but often you're trained at a company and then you move from river to river to river, which means that I think a lot of that river culture flows, to make a terrible pun. And so what I found was a bigger difference than region was the just the companies that have decided. There are some companies that are taking really cool action and working actively to change their culture. I would also say that probably there are some, you know, a big river community is West Virginia. And so that's just a more conservative place in the Pacific Northwest. And so there were some difference just in like, that we would assume just from like red state, blue state stuff. But the culture, there was equally horrifying and delightful stories from every region.
Just to piggyback that question, I was thinking about company size, because I think my inclination would be to say that a bigger company would have more management, bigger HR, better reporting, better, like more structured training. But then, you know, when you see like when you see the Park Service report that came out, it's like, holy cow, this huge organization had this really pervasive problem. And then I know, just in my personal experience working with a small company, I feel like communication's been really good because it is a small company. So anyway, this company size, did that have an effect, or just kind of varied?
You know, I would say where it had an effect, every guide I talked to, other than people that worked for one company, did not know that they had a reporting system at all. So there was one company that I would say is probably a bigger company that had a very clear reporting process. And I would say that is the biggest difference. I would say that your point is really well taken, that at a small company, and I just know this from my personal experience, I've worked for big raft companies that have over 100 employees. And I worked for a raft company where there was just me and 2 other dudes that were the guides. And it was a little easier to talk through like what was happening when it was just me and 2 other people, because we knew each other really well. We knew the owners really well. The owners would invite us over for dinner all the time. So it was sort of different in that way. I think what I've been considering really deeply lately is there's this big metaphor of family in the river industry. And I think that maybe happens in the Park Service as well, right? Because you work in these close communities where you live and you work together. And I think in establishments where that metaphor of family is used really often, it becomes a lot harder to accept that maybe there's a bad actor in your family, right? We all sort of turn a blind eye to that rowdy uncle on Thanksgiving. And so yeah, I don't know that this answers your question, Becca. I would say that a lot of companies think, well, we don't need that. We take care of each other here. But I would argue that you do need it, right? Because you just never know.
Maria, I'm curious about like where you're at with your research and like ongoing, if there's going to be any ongoing research, or I could imagine like looking at, like, I know the agencies are so big, but if you have any future plans of like where this might go.
Yeah. So I've been doing this research for a while. I'm finishing a book. My goal is to finish the book this summer and find a publisher and get that out. I started this project probably 5 years ago when I first conceived of it. And I'm really ashamed of some of the things I didn't ask and some of the questions I didn't ask. And I think that they need to be explored. So I have a really binary look at gender in this project. And I didn't even ask people their gender or their race when they interviewed them, which I feel like is a huge blind spot in my data. And so I think there's some really interesting things happening as more and more non-binary people are joining the outdoor world. And so I think that's an interesting place to grow. I think there's a lot of people who don't feel comfortable in these environments, not just women. And so looking at how, people of color are welcomed. As I have presented this, as I said at the beginning, people in agencies are interested, people in the ski industry are interested. I mean, I think this strikes a nerve for anyone that's been in the outdoor world for a moment. And so I don't know exactly where it will go. I know I want to keep making the outdoors more fun for more people. And so I don't know exactly what those research questions are or what that looks like, but I do know that I'm really interested in this topic and I want to keep doing that, whatever that looks like. And I feel like I should also add, I mentioned ADASH in there. I usually have a slide about ADASH and I don't know where that went, but Becca and Angie and myself and Risa, who also has been part of this, have started an organization called ADASH. Thank you, Angie, for popping that in there, where we are just helping to support people in the whitewater industry at making it a more inclusive place. So ADASH stands for Anti-Discrimination and Sexual Harassment. And it's company owners and RMS agency folks and guides and a few researchers, and we're just out there supporting folks to make it more fun for more folks.
Thanks for mentioning that, Maria. I was just about to.
I can't believe I didn't have my slide in there.
No worries. That's why I was so quick with the link.
Yeah, thank you.
I think one question that comes to mind for me at any of the, I mean, we've been involved in a few different types of conferences or webinars or things like this on this topic, which are not specifically your research, which was so cool. And thank you for sharing, because I've seen a few of the quotes from people, but so cool and relatable. But I think a question that comes up a lot, and it's not something that has a quick or easy answer, is like twofold. What if you're a manager that you really don't think you have a problem? You don't know if you have a problem. You have no way of assessing that. You don't really have the stuff in place you need to deal with it. But you don't even know where you're at with it. And then the other side of that being, what if you are a guide or like agency staff person and you know there's a problem and you know your management doesn't want to deal with it, or there's not a report anyway. What happens for these people? And I guess I was trying to think of how, if I were in your shoes, how I would answer that, because it's like not easy and complicated. But so I think A- would be a good resource for that. So shameless plug for the A- collaborative, because the trainers there can help with that. But I don't know if that's like so complex and 2 questions and a whole webinar in itself. But I think that's a question that I always leave having, like, that there are people here that are probably in those positions and it's frustrating. And so I guess I'm saying there are resources, and I don't know if there's anything you would add to that. But
I think I would add, I mean, the first one is easier to answer than the second. I would say after the Me Too movement, if you're a manager, I think you can just assume that like harassment could be happening in your workplace. We never want to think it's our friends. And I know myself, I've been the perpetrator of bad actions, right? And again, going back to my strategy was being crass when I was a raft guide, and I, would do almost anything to be funny, and I can cross those lines. And so, just making sure everyone fully understands how you report issues, but B, start having a culture where we talk about consent, right? Start conversations. They're really hard to have. I was at a session earlier today on DIY in the outdoors, and it was like, we're scared to have these conversations and they feel scary. But I think if you go to your crew and you say, listen, I don't totally know what I want to say here, but I want everyone to feel comfortable. And so, how can we do that? Maybe bring an expert in, bring in a trainer. If you're part of a larger agency, you might have people that are within house that can help support those conversations. But I say if you're a manager, like, it never hurts to start talking about consent, and it never hurts to start asking people if they feel comfortable. I think the people in a harder situation, and I have talked to several raft guides that feel like, yeah, there is harassment that happens at my organization and the owner wants nothing to do with it. And I think that that's a trickier place. The argument I would make to owners at that point is that culture is changing, and if you don't take care of it in-house, like, there are litigious ways that you can make arguments. And I'm in no way saying that you should sue anyone, but I keep hearing more and more stories of particularly these new Gen Z employees. They're going to go to social media, they're going to get that message out there. And so again, this goes back to the managers, but I think that people have ways of communicating about this that didn't exist before, and they're willing to communicate. And so if you're at a company, the other thing I'd say is just start talking to other people. The whisper networks go on. And so is there a step that you can go further than the whisper networks, right? Can you form a coalition of people and say, we never want to be scheduled with this person? And does management have to listen or take heed then? But I think that's a really trickier spot when you have less power. That's why I would ask the people that do have power to really consider, are you giving voice to people that might be in a situation that doesn't feel comfortable or safe? Or are you putting them in a position where they feel like their only choice is to leave?
great answer. Thanks, Maria.
I have one more. It sounds like you did a lot of research as well when you were doing this. Do you have like any recommendations for female-centered guide like studies or books or any of that?
Yeah, that's a good question. I mean, there's like the classic book Into the Current, which talks about some of the first female guides on the Grand Canyon, which is really awesome stories. The Georgie White book is sort of interesting, although she was quite a character, and I don't know that she was advocating for all women to be out on the river, but it is like, it's really neat to go back to the roots of some of those first commercial boaters that were women. But interestingly, I mean, there there is a lot more academic research about this coming up, but I don't know that there is a ton of resources or books about, being a female guide or supporting each other. There's some really cool social media stuff happening. So there are some like all female voter groups on Facebook that I find really inspiring, where women from all over the world come together and ask for support and suggestions for each other. And I'm also seeing that kind of on TikTok, although, those algorithms are interesting, but there's some folks you can follow of raft guides that are supporting each other. So I hope that answers your question.
Yes, it does. Thank you.
All right. Well, thank you
Sure.
so much, Maria. It's always great to hear about your research, and the new thing I learned today, which is a myth that I'd perpetrated at one point, was about Meryl Streep's stunt doubles. So I'm glad to learn that, because yeah.
It's truly, I feel like it's always talked about like, oh, it was my buddy. But you can Google it. The two women are really incredible boaters that have a ton of first descents, and there's really cool articles about their process of filming.
Yeah, no, that's super interesting. Well, great. Well, thank you all so much for joining us.